I'm going to show you the decks that I'm working with for the month of April. Just a reminder, I've moved the Taroscopes over to the Patreon, so if you're interested in that, you can go there. I'm also doing a tarot card by card series on the Patreon, as well as an Astro Basics series as well. So if you're interested in any of this stuff, you can go check it on out over at the Patreon. Otherwise, these decks that I'm using will be on, especially the tarot deck I'm using, will be on the Instagram and Facebook page. I do weekly, most weekdays, I do a draw from the tarot deck I'm using, and on weekends from some of the oracle decks that I'm using. So you can check it out there if you're interested in that. So first we'll do the tarot deck that I'm using for the month of April. It is a favorite of mine, a longtime favorite of mine. It is the Shadowscapes Tarot. This is the Llewellyn earlier edition. I think it's like the first edition of the Shadowscapes Tarot. So it's on like a thinner kind of cardstock. Llewellyn has moved to a slightly thicker cardstock. I actually don't mind the thin cardstock because it is easy to shuffle. I believe there is a slightly larger version of this deck, but I have the smaller, more sort of standard sized deck. I also have the one that came with the book as well. I think there's a version that comes in a smaller box, but I have the one with the book in it. I got this a few years ago. I want to say it was like 2014, 2015 or something. Whenever it was it came out is when I got this deck. I actually hadn't got a new deck in a while, and I saw this deck and I was like, oh, that deck is so pretty. And it really kind of kickstarted me kind of getting into tarot deck collecting again. I had kind of gone through like a weird sort of patch where, you know, I'd gotten divorced and stuff, and I was very like, I'd kind of fallen out a little bit of tarot card reading. Not that I ever totally did, but it was just sort of like a weird time where my focus was really elsewhere. And then I remember walking to my local shop and seeing these, and I was just like, oh, it really felt like this deck was calling to me as something I really needed at that time. So I'm really glad that I got it. You know, I got it, like I said, it was a few years after sort of my divorce and recovering from all that and everything, and I was kind of settling into a new period of my life. And so this deck kind of was like, hey, like it was kind of like a wake-up call in some ways to, like, you know, go into that new period and new phase of my life. I feel like I need to get the book because it'll tell me what year. Where is that book? Oh, here it is. Excuse me while I lean back. Oh, that's not it. All right, here we go. Try not to have this fall out on me. Okay, so Shadowscapes Companion. This will tell me what year. 2014. Okay, so I knew it was like 2014, 2015. So yeah, so I got this back in 2014. So yes, I love this deck. I've heard the only criticism I have about this deck, which I've heard from others I kind of agree with, is I do kind of wish they were a bit bigger just because the paintings are so beautiful. Like they're just these lovely watercolor, so detailed. And that's one of the more simpler ones. You know, I love how the blues are, like the cups are very blue and watery, and you've got all these, you know, lovely fish and mermaids and stuff. And then you've got the wands, which are very bright and sunny, and you've got unicorns here, but you've got a lot of foxes, which is like one of my spirit animals. Well, it's my main spirit animal, but I just love that. It's got that wonderful energy. And then for the swords, you've got lots of birds, especially swans and things. It's just gorgeous. So much going on in these pictures. And it's also got a very fae-like energy to me. Like it's got more of a sort of fairy-like energy to it, which I really love. The Pentacles has dragons, which I quite love. Very beautiful. And it's green, like the colors are well thought out. The imagery is so beautifully thought out. And every time I look at these, I feel like I see something else, another layer, another something that's going on. There's also the borders are slightly iridescent as well, which doesn't really show up in this camera, but there's something really silvery and lovely about them. There's lots of tree imagery in it. So it really has, even though there's human figures in these pictures, it is a very strong nature-like sort of deck, which for me I think goes really well with the season of April. Here it's spring. Spring here is very muddy, very brown. But this reminds me that in a month or so, we'll be green. We will have flowers again. So it has that really light, airy energy that I think is perfect for April here in the north, in Canada. It is, it definitely matches. This to me is very spring-like with all the birds, especially the crows and the ravens get really active at this time of year. We start to see some geese coming back. I finally saw geese yesterday, so very happy about that. The Four of Cups here. Beautiful. Oh, here's the foxes. Lots of fox energy. I just really, really love this deck, and I use this deck a lot with reading for other people as well because it's got a really sort of like gentle, airy sort of tone to it without being so airy and far away that it doesn't resonate with practical everyday. I find it reads very, very well and has a very sort of gentle type spirit with it. Now, the Oracle deck that I'm going to be pairing with that is another one that I find to have a lot of really great Fae energy, and that is the Messenger Oracle by Raven Felon. So this is another one I really love. My only complaint about this is the green borders are a bit thick. Try to get out the ring light there. There we go. But it's got like a fantasy type vibe in some of the same way that the Shadowscapes Tarot has. It's got that earthy, it's got a very green, earthy vibe to it. And so for me, it kind of balances with the more fairy-like vibe of an airy vibe of the Shadowscapes. This one's got a lot of great animal energy in it as well, which I quite like for this time of year. We're starting to see some of the animals come back and emerge out of hibernation. So it definitely speaks to me. And it's got like dragons and stuff in here too. So there is like that fantasy type element to this particular deck. I like this deck too because it does have a balance of sort of shadow and light to it as well. A lot of Oracle decks tend to be more on the, lighter, fluffy side, which sometimes you need. Sometimes you need that hug, right? But I like that this has a bit of a dark side to it as well. So I quite like this deck. So I am using that coupled with the Shadowscapes as well. Now I like to use a Lenormand deck with my readings as well. I used this one in March, but I am using it. It doesn't really have a fantasy-like vibe, but I do associate this one with spring, and that is the classic tarot, or the classic Lenormand. So this is the one that's often referenced to in books you find about Lenormand. It's kind of got a more turn of the century Victorian type vibe to it. But for me, for some reason, it just speaks of spring to me. So I like that. I like all the greens and yeah, I like it. I find that it says spring to me. So I use it in the springtime. And then I always like to have another deck as well that's like a little bit more spiritual. Like I feel like the Lenormand's sort of like the practical day-to-day stuff. And then the tarot is more like the psychological, the mental level. I feel like the Oracle decks are often like an emotional level. And then for the spiritual level, we have, I usually pick like a God deck or sometimes an angel deck as well. But I'm still working with the Goddess Power Oracle cards. I am loving these so much. I find they're just really, really great. Very, like they're about the divine feminine, but there is like a quiet sort of strength to them. And I also find these to be very, very healing. Whenever I've used them to read for people, people really love them, and they find the messages to be just very, very healing and empowering. I really like that it has a lot of different archetypes from different cultures and stuff. She doesn't just draw on like, European mythology. There we go. It's a really beautiful deck, and I think it goes really well with the others too. So that's the decks that I'm going to be using for the month of April. So if you're, ordering a reading from me or anything, this is probably the decks that I'll choose from. As well, if you're following me on Instagram or Facebook, you're going to see cards from these decks as well. So let me know what you're using for the month of April. Are you using any of these decks? Do you like any of these decks? Do you hate them? Let me know what you think. I would love to hear. Like and subscribe, and thank you so much for watching. And as always, peace and love and rock.